Welcome to Royal Haunts and Part 5 of the House of Stuart and the Commonwealth. James' life was thrown into turmoil at a young age as the rift between Parliament and the Crown became so wide that it led to civil war. James was just 9 years old when the first battle took place at Edge Hill. His mother, Henrietta Maria, was already in Europe seeking aid for the royalist cause, though this was one more charge levied against Charles I, as any dealings with Catholics was looked upon with suspicion. When the king was captured, his queen managed to escape, travelling to Bedford House in Exeter, where she gave birth to her last child, a daughter named Henrietta Anne, which she had to leave behind in order to escape to safety. The newborn child followed on later, as did James, who was at Oxford until it surrendered to the parliamentary forces. James was held under house arrest at St James's Palace, only managing to escape with the aid of royalist supporters, and in disguise joined his family in Europe. During his exile, James forged an impressive military career, and by the time of his brother's restoration had become a fine young man in his mid-twenties. The only downfall in the eyes of the people was that James openly declared himself to be Catholic, something that was quite unforgivable. During his brother's reign, he was appointed Lord High Admiral of the Royal Navy, what under the Commonwealth had become a force to be reckoned with. James married Anne Hyde, the daughter of Charles II's chief adviser, who had gone into exile with the royal family. The marriage lasted 11 years up to Anne's death, leaving 2 young daughters, Mary and Anne, who both took to the throne in place of their father and half-brother. It was shortly after his wife's death that James converted to Catholicism, with no one able to persuade him to turn from such a dangerous path. It led to allegations that James, and even Charles' wife, who was also Catholic, was involved in plots to kill the king in order for James to take the throne and the country back to the authority of the Pope. James waited over 2 years before remarrying a choice selected as suitable by Louis XIV of France, who was involved in numerous dealings with Charles II, with an agreement that the king should be Catholic and that the country should veer back to such a state. It seems that James, rather than Charles, was taking on the burden. His 2 daughters being brought up under the Protestant faith, and Charles producing no legitimate heir, James needed a son. During the first 12 years of marriage as Duke and Duchess of York, Mary of Modena didn't give birth to son nor daughter that survived beyond infancy, and when she did give birth, 3 years into James' reign as king, this was looked on with suspicion. Rumours soon spread that the Queen had given birth to yet another dead child, and a more healthy baby had been smuggled into the birthing chamber. It was even suggested the Queen, at 29, was too old to produce a child. The birth of James Francis Edward Stuart led to the loss of a kingdom for his father. Within months of Charles II's death, his illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth, who had been sent into exile after being involved in a plot to kill both his father and uncle, returned to England in a bid to capture the throne. Although many saw Monmouth as the rightful heir, it being helpful that a rumour was spread that his parents had secretly married, his illegitimate status was a bone of contention that not enough support came from those who could supply an army. It would also have meant another civil war, and with Charles' brother being the true heir, James sent an army to put down the rebellion. Monmouth declared himself king, and with a band of men, armed with no more than pitchforks, set off to fight. Those who didn't die on the battlefield at Sedgemoor may well have wished they had. Monmouth fled, only to be captured, and despite his plea for mercy was beheaded at Tower Hill. His followers suffered just as much, with trials taking place where Judge George Jeffreys, who denied what he saw as traitors to the Crown, a fair trial. Many were duped into pleading guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence, only to be taken out and hung, while others were put into slavery, being shipped to the West Indies, with many dying en route on the disease-ridden ships. The Monmouth rebellion has left a mark on the land, with many places claiming to be haunted. Figures have been seen at and around Sedgemoor, including the Duke of Monmouth, along with the groans of the dying still being heard from that fateful battle. Monmouth is also said to haunt the woodland at Horton in Dorset, where he was found cowering in a ditch, the most prominent date being the 15th of July, this being the date of his execution. Judge Jeffreys, with his tyrant ways, and the sentences he carried out in the name of King James II, had repercussions on the Crown's downfall, and he is said to haunt many places where the trials were conducted. Taunton Castle is where the feet of marching men have been heard as they entered the castle to be tried and sentenced. A few were flogged throughout the counties, but for most it was hanging or deportation. The local inn, all so often acting as a courthouse and even a morgue, held trials at the Skirrid Mountain Inn at Abergavenny, which claims to be very active, as does the Dolphin Inn at Penzance. The birth of a son brought a change of hierarchy, and William of Orange, having married the eldest daughter of James II, expected to one day be king. It didn't take much for dissident members of Parliament to persuade him to travel to England and take the throne by force. Setting sail with 15,000 troops, as William approached, James found his support dwindling. The Queen was swiftly sent abroad, while what became known as the Glorious Revolution swept throughout the country. William made his way to London, and on arriving at the capital, with James II having fled, Parliament offered the crown to William. James made one last attempt to secure his throne by rallying the support of Catholic Ireland, but many of their numbers had been diminished under Cromwell rule, and the final battle saw James fleeing into exile. Being a guest at Athcarn Castle, James II is still said to return to where he had his last chance to retain his kingdom. He lived out his life in France, where he was recognised as King James. His wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to yet another child, a daughter named Louisa. Throughout the reign of William and into the House of Hanover, attempts continued to put the Stuarts back on the throne in the form of James, his son and his grandson.